What inspired you to make this film of Nina Simone at this time?
Well, I started the process, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and it was an idea that was rattling around in my head for quite a while, because I discovered Nina when I was a teenager growing up and sort of loved her and was intrigued by her, and never quite understood her, as I think a lot of people have that same feeling. And there's a really good biography that was written in the last 10 years called Princess Noir. Nina wrote her own book called I Put a Spell on You, but Princess Noir really gave a much fuller background to Nina's life in the context of where things were happening and how things were happening. And it sort of, when I read it, I thought this is the basis for the film. And the first sort of step when I finished my previous film, I was invited down to Charleston, South Carolina, and I knew I was going to be very close to Tryon. And I made some connections in the town, and I just wanted to go visit and see the statue and sort of get a feeling of where Nina and Sam grew up. And the man I met who was responsible for basically creating the statue introduced me and basically set me up with interviews with most of the people you met in the beginning of the film, all the people who grew up with Nina or Eunice at that time. And so I walked away with all this amazing footage, and I thought, this is a film already, so I had to continue forward.
Sam?
Yes.
There are a lot of projects on Nina Simone. There's a Hollywood film, there are other documentaries. Why did you give this particular film your blessing?
Very simple, because it told the truth. I am not going to cast judgment. I don't do that. I never have, and I won't start now. There's a message, a line that goes, "Judge not, lest ye be judged also." I don't judge anyone. I can disagree. I can not like. But they have a right to make any film they wish. The problem with that is, if you're going to call it a documentary, don't call it a documentary if you're going to make up stuff. Number one. Don't call it a documentary if you don't tell the truth about the person or the subject matter that you're covering. When I met Jeff, and he showed me the footage that he had, and I said, okay, this is the real deal here. He had interviewed a lot of Nina's friends, co-workers, and so forth, and of course, Jeff will tell you, the first thing they asked was, have you interviewed Sam? And he said, is he going to be in touch with the film? Is he going to be part of the film? And they said, yes. He said, yes. And then they said, okay, you can talk to me. Now, I got to tell you, these other two films, or the other documentary, I'm not going to go into the background of that. The Netflix film, it didn't get my blessings. And it will not get my blessings. There are some things in there that, and I'm not casting judgment on my niece, who was the executive producer. She's blood, she's family. I do not believe in hanging your dirty underwear out for everybody to see. But there are some inequities in that film, Alice. And the truth of the matter is, as Jeff can say, everything in that film, I was there. I was there. So I know, I know things. And it would be very amiss of me not to be part of this film because of my sister. And what she said to me at 3 o'clock in the morning, you know that line. I tell this line all the time. You know, right? You know what I'm about to say. She calls everybody. She lived in France. And she used to call everybody over here at 3 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock, our time. And Jeff knows this. I had to tell a story because this is the only way this makes sense. And the last time I spoke to Nina, she called me at 3:30, actually. Sam, this is your sister Nina. I said, hello, Nina. But see, I call her Eunice. And when I call her Eunice, she steps back, because not too many people are allowed to call her Eunice, right? Okay. And she said I reminded her of her daddy when I do that. Like she suddenly misbehaved and like I'm going to spank her. I said, Eunice, hi, Sam. Now, when she calls me, she always playing my record in the background, because she and I, she had this little thing between us. She always liked to play. She said, I want to play like you. And I said, you want to play like me? I want to play like you. So she and I would have this little fun, because we had this grand piano. She would sit on one side, I sit on the other. And she said, let's just play something. So I'll start playing some doo-wah something with some R&B thing. And she liked that. So she'll add to it, she'll improvise. So she adds all. Okay, classic motif. I would say it's the truth.
Okay.
Let me shut the hell up. I just have so many stories. I just can't help myself. But
Well,
it's the truth about Nina. That's why.
Because it's the truth. Jeff, what challenges, if any, did you have in making this film?
This is going to be a long one.
I can simplify. Everything that Sam just talked about with, competing films has been a challenge, obviously, because, there's only so much room and attention for stories about someone like Nina Simone. But I am of the firm belief that Nina's life was so complex and filled with so many chapters that there's room for multiple films, and I've sort of come to peace with the idea that, it's not a competition. It's not. It's okay, and we all offer something different on Nina. Sam sort of gave me the challenge when we first met, to saying that many Nina Simone projects have started and never come to completion. So I was, challenged to just finish the film, really. More specifically, I made it almost entirely with my own money, because, the film festival sort of passed my film over because there was already a Nina Simone documentary. I did a Kickstarter campaign that raised some money, but not really very much. Distribution companies weren't really interested in working with me because I didn't have a long track record. So, the one thing I thought was, well, I can make this film, complete it, and then let it speak for itself. And I got to this point, so I'm happy.
How long did it take you to make this film? What was the process?
I think beginning to end, it was about 3.5 years. That's starting with research, and maybe the trip to Tryon was about 3 years ago. So it was about a year of filming, maybe 6 months of research before that, a year of editing, polishing, cleaning it up, testing it, film festivals, and when it debuts in 2 weeks, it'll probably be about 3.5 years. Yeah.
Before we open up questions to the floor, I have a question for you, Sam. Throughout the film, we kept hearing that Nina longed to be a classical musician. And I think near the very end, she had it was a heartbreaking moment where she said she may have been happier. Do you think she would have had an impact, or the impact that she did have, had she been a classical musician? And to what extent can you speak about how she really felt about the music that she played that made her famous?
I can talk about that because she and I spoke on that in Los Angeles, because even though she was classically trained, her message as a spokesman for the pain and suffering of her people would not have been as powerful through classical music. It's not possible, because when as they asked her to start singing at that club in Atlantic City, right, she was playing, and that's all she was doing at the club. And the only way that she could make more money was the club owner said, look, Miss Simone, if you open your mouth and sing, I can pay you as much as this other guy. And she did. And that was Porgy, was what became the first record. But she understood the power of her voice and piano playing together because they connect. And she realized, oh, because she sang all the time. There was the Waymon sisters. It's not the first time she sang, you know. But I think she realized that her voice could move. She could say more with her voice and her piano playing. That's the impact. It would not have been the same. She would have definitely made inroads as a classically trained person, there's no doubt. But the times were right. The times were ripe and right for her opinions, her reactions, her ability to see things, to what was happening to her people, what was happening to people. And the best way that you can affect change is through your words, through your voice. And she found that niche, and when she found that, the rest is history. So yes, I think no to the classical trained part, yes to the combination of both. And she never gave up the classical part of her music either, because as you know, it runs throughout her music. You know, whether it's blues, R&B, funk, or whatever, reggae, you can hear the classical motif in there. And so she was able to utilize that training. She never gave up on it.
Now we'll take questions from the audience.
It was definitely a challenge to, for those of you who didn't hear the question, yeah.
How did the 60s and the political strife influence you in making this film?
It was a challenge to address segregation and civil rights in the context of Nina's life, only because it was a question of how much information do you really give, how much do you assume the audience already knows about certain events and certain details. And I decided in the end that I wouldn't take that for granted, that it needed to be told, not spending a ton of time, but it needed to be told chronologically in context from each major event and where was Nina at the time. You know, Nina wasn't at the March on Washington, but I still included it because I thought that was such a pivotal moment, and maybe interesting for the fact that she wasn't there. I also was, concerned that my own personal background, having not lived through the 60s, having not lived my life as a black person in the United States, that I may not know or understand some of the finer things about telling the story. So I did rely on friends, family, Sam, other people in the film to sort of test the film out and make sure that it was telling it correctly. And in the instance of the fire hoses, a friend of mine who is black said, I sort of feel like you're showing too much of that. I want to see more images of black people in more powerful stances during that time, which was an interesting thought. I think we're so used to seeing those fire hoses because they're so shocking, but we don't see, black people marching proudly in the streets in the 60s as much, and that's what I wanted to include. I think the very first cut I had was about 2 hours and 15 minutes, and the poor people who had to watch that film and give me their feedback really suffered through, a long film. So, I thought it was correct and complete, and I knew it was long, but I didn't know where to trim. And ultimately, I think where I trimmed the most was in the 70s and 80s and 90s, where things were sort of continually the same, and you could sort of dwell on some of the sadder moments of Nina's illness and how she was acting in the world. And I felt compelled to tell the truth and to include every moment and be detailed. But at the same time, people were saying that it was repetitive, and we got it. We got the point, and we want to celebrate Nina. We don't want to dwell on the sadder parts. So I really look to testing the film and for feedback from people to finally feel like I got it right. Thanks. And the day I showed it to Sam, that was a a bit of a nervous moment for me because I wanted to make sure the film was in the right place before showing it to him. And we sat down in his apartment, and I think I got emotional showing it to him more so than Sam did, because here I was, telling him, this is what your family was like, this is what your town was like, this is what your sister was like in her musical career, and here you are performing in London. I don't know, I was sort of like, who am I to tell you what that was like? But it was a nice moment, and he was very happy and complimentary.
It was very pensive for me, I have to admit to that, because it's very strange to see yourself and who you are and what you are about and so forth, when you don't even know sometimes what you are about. But you see that it's been captured through someone else's eyes, someone else's vision, and the impact that had on you and how you were able to put that together. It was just spellbound. I was overwhelmed with gratitude. I was grateful. I was thankful that finally someone captured the essence of what this little girl Blue was all about, And I felt very proud, and I told you that. I said, because you have to understand, I've gone through 5 startups of this film. They came over from France 5 or 6 years ago. Then it was London. Then it was Germany. Same old things. And nobody finished it. And that disappointed me, But you did not. You did not. You haven't disappointed me yet, and it never will. But you were right. I was very much on it. You were almost in tears. This guy was just, I don't know. I should have given you some Prozac or something. But I could understand why he was nervous. I could understand it because I had to step back. I'm just not, and I say this, Ernest, I'm not just Sam. I realize that I'm a different person. I'm a different. You become so many different people in this life, in this world.
There were also, I was also nervous because Sam and I had sat down and talked on camera for days upon days. And I wasn't sure if he remembered everything that he had said in the film and would be comfortable with everything that he revealed being on screen. And so that was part of my nervousness too.
Yes.
And, to Sam's credit, he was very revealing about many different aspects of Nina's life.
Yes.
And so, I was hoping that everything that he had offered would stay in the film, which it did.
Yes, you kept a lot of it in it. It was amazing. And the family endorsed this film and endorsed Jeff with open arms. Everyone gave him blessings, and I cannot say about everything else, the other films, but that's how relevant and pertinent, obviously, Jeff's vision captured, because the family said, yeah, this is cool, this is right.
Looks like we have another question.
Yes. Oh, and then Eugene. Okay.
With regard to her mental state, was she ever diagnosed? And
Yes. Yes. Yes, she was diagnosed. She was diagnosed in France with me. I put her, I guess I should say that, right? Okay. I put her in the hospital in France. Yeah, they saw that? Okay. That was me. I did that. And I had to save her.
What about a specific category of
Mental health. I had to save her from herself. And I'm getting to that because she used to drink a lot, and then she would take pills a lot. The combination was deadly. But she had 7 personalities. 7 diagnosed. There's a record of that. I knew all 7. No. Later on in life. I would say, I can't say exactly when, but There were 7 different personalities, and sometimes if you were to speak to one of them, you didn't know if you were talking to a man or a woman. I had to understand which one I was talking to. That was trial and error. It was a challenge, to say the least. I lost a lot of weight. I'm thin as it is, but you would not have recognized me at some point. And I used to call my mom all the time, my mother, and say, Mom. And my mother was wonderful. She would say, and she knew the personalities too. She said, son, she is your sister. Now, you do what, I trust you, she would say. You do what you think is right. And she said, because she was an ordained minister, she said, well, God will give you the right message. Just follow your heart. And the day that I had to put her in the hospital for that diagnosis was the day that I called my mother immediately. And I said, Mom, I had to put Nina in the hospital. And it's scary to me. And she said, well, she prayed on the phone for a second or two. And then she said, she's in your hands. She's in God's hands, but you do what is right. And I know it will come out okay, because you're going into it right. She had 7 different personalities. They put her, I'm going to say it, and most public doesn't know this. They put her in a straitjacket in France. They put her in a straitjacket for about 24 hours. We were on tour at the time, and I had to get rid of the band. I was managing her, so I got rid of the band, sent him back to New York, took her straight into that hospital, Jeff. She stayed in that straitjacket for 24 hours. The doctors said, because she was possessed with these enormous ups and downs and depths of her soul. You could hear her screaming here, you know, and then 5 seconds later, it would be Little Girl Blue, sweet, and, you know, wow. And you being a therapist, and anyone else out there who've had experience in mental health, the paradox of these personalities preying, P-R-E-Y, off of each other.
Yes.
Okay?
I think we have another question. Yeah. Her daughter chose not to be interviewed in the film, and I think it was in a note on the film. Why?
She didn't want to be part of it. If you watch the Netflix film, that's the film that she made, and she presented her story in that film. And we had brief conversations about working together, and she decided to go that direction. I just want to just go back to your question for just a brief second about the bipolar versus schizophrenia versus the real answer, and from a filmmaking perspective, is there was no clear answer, and so I tried to present as many possibilities as I could hear. And as you see in the film, it's not one person's story of Nina, which, you know, other films, you know, tend to focus on just one person. I didn't want to make a film about Sam's memories about Nina. That didn't interest me as much as hearing from Sam, as hearing from Al Shackman, Leopoldo Fleming, all her musicians, all her fellow activists and childhood friends. And I interviewed over 80 people for the project. And last night I was walking through the streets trying to count how many people I left out of the film. And it's about 30, because there was just too much but there's 50 people who offer their perspective. And like Sam, other people had to deal with her illness and try and figure out what was the best medication, the best solution, including her husband in the 60s, including her friends in Europe in the 80s and 90s. Everyone had a different story about her illness. And I think that was the large problem, is it wasn't diagnosed early. And she was on lithium in the 60s. That wasn't the right thing. She was in really intense therapy at one time. That Nina talks about having been in intense therapy. She was journaling. But it never seemed like she really had the right medication. And I think bipolar is maybe the closest diagnosis, but I have friends who've studied Nina who will argue it was definitely schizophrenia. And if you study all the behavior, at one point I thought about bringing in a therapist to the film to try and diagnose her, and it just didn't feel like the right thing. So I just sort of left it at that.
Was your family very supportive of Nina, Eunice, in her career and her life?
Yes. I've said I was going to be brief.
And the second part was a question regarding you playing with her and touring with her, and maybe you can speak to that.
It went on for over 25 years, on and off. I started with her playing tambourines at the Village Gate with Mary McCabe and Hugh Masekela. And it went on from there to my friend Max Roach and Miles Davis and so forth. I was her organist. Way back in those days, we had something called the Beast, the Hammond B3 organ. Hammond B3. That's what I played, as big as this table. And that was a monster. They call it a beast because it's huge, but we had to travel. All the jazz musicians did that. Jack McDuff, all those, Earl, what's his name? Yeah. No, I can't. But those of us who played the Hammond B3, we would sit back in the green room and talk about the cost of this damn thing, taking it in. It was amazing. But that's what I did for a while. And then with her, but I was always playing with her and singing with her, one way or the other. And then it became, she asked me to manage her, which I did. Because at that time when she was going through her stages of mistrust and her illnesses and things, and people were taking advantage of her, were stealing from her left to right. And the only person she really trusted was Sam. And she asked me, very clearly, she asked me, would you manage me? And because I don't trust anybody else. And I said, of course. I mean, I knew what to do. Don't let anybody get next to the girl, that's all. And I did that. So over the years, over the 25 or so years, I was with her, in and out. The best years were in the 60s, 70s, late 60s, and early and 70s, because that's when that's when I took her to for the Fort Dix, but we played for the King of Morocco, we played for the President of France, we did all those kind of things, So those were the good years, the protest years, late 60s. Again, I think about Cairo, Illinois, and all that sort of thing. So over the years, I was able to play with her, to protect her the best way I could. She protected me. It wasn't just one way. We cared for each other's music. She supported my music. She supported, my film scores that I wrote and so forth. She would come to the film openings, and she would always say to me, "You're doing something that I wish I could do. I never have been able to do, and that is write film scores." So we had something that we could, exchange with each other. And that made it a great relationship, because it wasn't just Nina Simone. She hated that all the time. She liked being Eunice Waymon. There were times when, you didn't ask me this question, but there was times when being Nina Simone was a burden. You know, it was too much, it was a lot of pressure. You see this film? That's the legacy. Now, yes, thanks. I gotta finish. This hits home because as I was trying to say to you when she made that call to me at 3 o'clock in the morning, this gets to the heart of the reason this is important. She called me at 3 o'clock in the morning, and the reason she called me because she said to me, you know, when you're brother and sister, you can pick up something that something is wrong with your sibling. I said, Nia, what's wrong? I could sense it. I could feel something was off. She said, I'm all right. I said, no, this is your brother you're talking to. You're not all right. And she said to me, and I'll never forget it, which is the heart of this film, if I hand you the torch, will you take it? That's a very profound sentence. It's a request. And she was asking me, the torch meaning all of who she is, all of what I am, all of what the world is about, the vision, the paradox, dichotomy of everything, the complexity of everything, the death, the love, the hate, the joy of life and struggle and pain and joy, all of that. Will you take the torch? And she knew that I would because I was right there with her. And so I made a commitment to not just to her, but to it, which is I am going to carry on her legacy as Eunice Waymon, AKA Nina Simone, because everybody has a legacy. Each of you have a legacy, all of us. But I promised her that I would do that. And it's as much of my legacy as it is hers. It's not, you know what I'm saying? You know, so I like to think that everything that I hear out in the news footage and on television, Nina's name is everywhere. She would just be so, she would say, what in the world is going on? Everybody's talking about me. When she was alive, nobody would talk about her hardly at all. You know, and so my reaction, my point is, she would be very proud about this film.
Thank you. That's extremely nice to say. I have a different answer. I think her legacy is really Mississippi Goddamn, because that song is, I don't think there's anything that really touches it in terms of the boldness and the musicality and the poignant message that she wrote 60 years ago that is still so relevant today. So that's why, and in addition to being a brilliant musician, and which is why her music is on TV and in films and that kind of thing, I think it's the message that still resonates and people connect with, and it's an authenticity that hasn't been tampered with auto-tuning and that kind of thing. And she wrote it. You know, she was a brilliant writer in addition to being a brilliant pianist and singer. And it's interesting that multiple personalities keeps coming up, because I personally have a feeling that if Nina wasn't black, if she was white, that perhaps she wouldn't have been labeled in certain ways in the early 60s the way she was. As you saw in the articles, all the articles would say she's difficult or tempestuous, or she'd walk out in clubs and she scolded people. You know, people do that all the time. The fact that Nina was doing it from the stage was somewhat unique, but I don't think America was really used to black women speaking up for themselves and demanding respect. And therefore, she had to be something else, something other. There had to be something wrong with her. And we do know that she had mental illness, so I'm not trying to say that it wasn't that and that isn't relevant, but there's also sort of a focus as to why she was acting the way she was acting.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, record companies are very fickle monsters. You know, she used to call, that song she wrote called Stupid Dog. It was about record companies. Because record companies, and I'm a recording artist, I was on RCA, I was on Polygram. I was on the same label Nina was. Record companies want you to be a certain way. How dare you, Nina Simone, be different? How dare you? That's what he's talking about. We were sitting in these conference meetings, the conference room meetings about, and this is important, I know, it's about control. They couldn't control her, therefore she was difficult. Simple as that. If you can't control a person, then how dare you, then you're difficult. If you don't think like I want you to think or voice the opinion, if you have an opinion, let me give it to you. And that's what they wanted. And she said, no, I am going to do me. I have something to say about my people. And she would call a white person a stupid son of a bitch and a sucking. I don't care if he was the guy who just signed her multi-million-dollar contract. It didn't matter. And I use the word white specifically because it was usually the old white men sitting in the room that makes these decisions. I'm being very specific. And these were, when I said tonight, when I sang that song for the elegant, sophisticated racist out there, these people were racist because they made money off of people that they can control. And everybody knows, Nina was not a typical jazz singer. She hated that. She was not a reggae singer. She was not an R&B. She said, don't call me anything. They didn't know what to do with her. So she said, then I'm going to do my own thing. That's a very difficult road to travel when you're out there by yourself like that. And she was. That made her very bitter. I mean, you can understand, I hope you can understand, traveling that road by yourself when you know the industry of which you are in doesn't really want you. Thank you.
Well, that was an incredible film, incredible discussion. And thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
For all of your hard work, and Sam.
Thank you.
For keeping the historical accuracies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rivertown
I'll see
Film
you all at
Society.
Spice of India. So come on over. You can have some
Don't
drinks.
forget to grab a postcard and come to our art exhibit on October 15th and the premiere in New York on October 16th.